Hey friends, this is just a reminder in case you missed last week's episode. We are rethinking our YouTube presence and what that might look like, and are planning to be back with something else. But today's episode of the Sustainable Ministry Show that's delivered to YouTube will be the final YouTube version. However, the podcast is not going away, so you can subscribe to us on iTunes or the Google Play Store. We'd love to have you join us there. But now our final episode on YouTube of the Sustainable Ministry Show. Here is episode 46. Today we're starting a two-part conversation on leaving your church position well. The first part, we discuss how to do that when you've been asked to leave. This is episode 46 of the Sustainable Ministry Show. Don't want your fingers near that. Well, hey everybody, we are back again with the Sustainable Ministry Show, hanging out on my right with Stephen Ingram and on my left, Melissa Rao. And we are going to follow up from our conversation last week about applying for jobs and what that looks like, and actually talk about on the back end of that. So you've had a job and you're preparing to leave. And we want to talk about what that looks like as well. Certainly applying well will help you land a job, and leaving well means that the church is left in a good place, you leave in a good place, and you're prepared for what comes next. So why don't we launch right on into that this week? Melissa, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Friends, I'm not sure what your background is or your experience with this, but sometimes when you leave a job, whether it's on your own volition or whether it's not, a lot of times pride can get in the way, and there's some very emotional feelings that go on because, again, we're typically serving in churches that we care about and feel called to. So I'm just wondering if you have any advice, if maybe you have any stories that you could share about either your own experiences in leaving well or your own experiences in leaving not so well.
Yeah, I'll start us off. So I'm an Alabama football fan.
What?
Yeah, I know, weird, huh? A couple nights ago, we played in the national championship game against Clemson.
I was going to ask if you're still an Alabama fan.
Yeah, I'll always be an Alabama. Listen, I lived through some really hard years in the 80s and mid-90s, so it's okay. However, this does go back to the question. Our offensive coordinator, a guy named Lane Kiffin, accepted a job at another school before the national championship game. He accepted a head coaching job. And the idea was that he would stay on with the team through the national championship to finish out the year with the team as the offensive coordinator. Well, about 10 days before the national championship game, we get an announcement that Lane is no longer with the team. There are a lot of rumors, but basically what it boiled down to, from what I understand, is that he was kind of phoning it in. He wasn't there. He wasn't there in mind, he wasn't there in presence, and he wasn't finishing well. And it was hurting the team. And so some of the leaders of the team came to the coaches and said, "Hey, look, we don't feel like we're getting our full offensive coordinator." And so I think they made the decision to move on. I have seen that happen time and time again in churches, where you get the new job, you make the announcement, and then it's just a downhill slide from there. And that's natural because you're transitioning into the new thing. That's beautiful. But you have to finish well. You don't want to leave those ends untied. You don't want to leave bruised relationships or disappointments. And so you have to overcompensate. Severely overcompensate to finish well and to overcome those natural inclinations to let go as you grab a hold of what's new. So you have to be super, super self-conscious about that.
It's a great point. I think a number of times in churches, especially in churches, people, when they're leaving, they want to honor, they all have the best intentions in mind and honor the church and say, okay, well, you know what? That mission trip is coming up. Maybe if I can work it out with my new church, I'll go on that mission trip. I'll wrap up and I'll finish up here in like 6 to 8 weeks. And then leave. I've seen that work very few times. Mm-hmm. Most of the times it's not awesome. So Bryant, do you have any ideas, opinions, or thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was thinking, just to step back, I was thinking we know what it looks like to leave poorly. Mm-hmm. And that thing is often messy. There's a lot of kind of negative talk. Sometimes the staff person's like, who would believe they did this to me? In the case that somebody's asked to step down. We know what that looks like. sometimes when we have made the choice to leave, we'll do things just like you're talking about, Melissa, and try and stage it out. I think the reality is it's going to be hard no matter what. And so it really becomes a spiritual issue, first and foremost. Are we committed to the fruit of the Spirit, regardless of what we're doing? Are we committed to the fruit of the Spirit if we have chosen to leave? It's probably easier for us to say yes when it's of our own choice, but are we committed to that when we have been asked to leave from our position? How you leave well, I think, is really reflective of who we are spiritually and where we are in our faith journey and how committed we are to that. Because if I'm going to say peace is a part of who I am, I'm committed to that, then that needs to play out even when things don't go well for me or go well for my life or go well or different than what I thought they should be. I think we have to embrace those all along the way, and some of the negative talk and the gossipy stuff around when somebody's been asked to leave does not support that in any form. But then staging it out, I don't know, a 6 to 8 week kind of announcement always feels bad to me, trying to map out, well, we'll do this mission trip, and I'll really embrace everybody, and then I'll leave. I think that kind of thing just makes it worse too.
Sure.
You know?
I think sometimes we have to ask ourselves what's best for the church.
Yeah.
Truly. Not what's best for us, but what is truly best for the church. I know. It's such a hard question, right?
Well, and the thing too is whenever you have a transition, you know that people are going to have pain. And, you know, we see it all the time in transitions. You lose people. The church loses people during transitions because they had a very real personal connection to the person leaving. And so they kind of get lost in the mess, or they, even if it's a good transition, they can still get lost in the mess. And so, you know, to try to minimize that as much as possible. I can't tell you how many people, and I've experienced this before too, when, you know, I had a youth minister leave, you know, it kind of disenchants you and it hurts you. And so when we leave, we have to understand that that's happening in people's hearts and their soul and their mind, and to really buffer that pain and to encourage them and to help them know that you're not the reason why they go to that place, that there's something greater than you. You just happen to be one conduit of that greater thing, which is God. And so to try to redirect them away from you and your gifts into the greater thing that God's calling them to do. If we can do that, transitions can actually be growth times, not times that hurt individuals and cause them to fall away from the church.
Sure. What about any stories that you might have, or any thoughts regarding holding on to a job when perhaps you shouldn't be? You know, is there writing on the wall that people might consider when they are discerning, should I stay or should I go? You guys have any examples of or healthy things that could help people discern when it might be time to reconsider?
Yeah, I worked with a church this year in which it became clear to one of the associate pastors that this person had discerned for themselves that ministry wasn't really the place where they were supposed to be working. They'd gone to seminary, had been a pastor, been in a pastoral role for a while, and just realized that's not actually the place that they're supposed to be. So they had submitted their what's the letter called? Resignation. Thank you. They submitted the resignation, but asked if they could stay on until they were able to find another job. And so it was challenging for the church to respond because they want to extend goodwill. This person certainly wants to take care of their family and home and all that sort of stuff, and yet it's not actually what was going to be best for the church as a whole. So together they planned a final date, and kind of did that in conjunction with each other, and that helped kind of move things forward, helped eliminate any of the kind of bad stories that might be developed in the midst of that. But that's a case, right, where it's clear to you as a staff person you're no longer supposed to be there. So how long do you just kind of carry on in that and still be strategic about protecting yourself or protecting your family, and also doing what's best for the church?
Right.
Yeah, I think when you start to kind of feel those urges, when you start to feel those kind of twinges in your gut, where you begin to think about leaving, the first thing I would do is just say, ask a couple questions of yourself. Is it that God's really calling you into something new or away from this, or are you just in a really tough time right now? What we don't want people to do is to run every time the going gets tough, because it's going to, especially in ministry. And you're going to have valleys, and sometimes those valleys last for months and months. So the first thing I would say is, really evaluate, is God still using you and still calling you in this situation? If you believe God is, then you've got to figure out how to endure the valley and how to move forward. If, however, you are at that point, you say, I'm not effective there anymore. That's when you can start thinking about moving on to the next thing. But I see people so often, they've just been in the valley for too long, and they go, well, that must be my sign. That's not always the sign. The other thing is, a lot of times God is trying to actually mold you and change you through that situation. So just because things aren't working out doesn't mean that, it must mean I have to leave. Maybe God's working in you to transform you into something new. And that refinement process is not easy. The Bible uses the image of iron sharpening iron. I mean, that you don't want your fingers near that, right? I mean, that's a kind of a scary process. But what it does is it refines it. And so maybe God's refining you and using the church in some situations to help do that.
It's such an interesting idea. You may actually be running from the work that God is doing.
That's right.
As opposed to the challenges that you're facing.
That's right.
Yeah. Wow.
Good illustration. So I guess one final question I have is, what of the times, because we see this a lot, what of the times when you have been asked to leave because you have maybe undermined trust or made a bad decision that affected their ability to keep you on, for whatever reason it might be, that the relationship is ended. But perhaps not everybody that you're ministering with or to is in the band or in that wagon. So I'm wondering how you might encourage folks to not try to walk the line of division in their departure.
It's a big question.
Yeah. I think about it, it's something we mentioned earlier. It's easy to get revenge in those situations. It is really easy to get revenge and to use people as agents of revenge, right? To kind of egg people on and to help heap coals on top of people. Now, I do think there are times when folks might be coming against someone who works in the church in an unjust fashion, where they something's gotten under their skin, and instead of addressing the problem directly, they're kind of attacking from other angles, right? And we know that happens in church. And if you don't think that happens in church, work in a church for 6 months. You'll see it. And that's just part of it. I mean, it's a people organization. So if it's an unjust pushing out, and you still feel that God is calling you to be a part of that organization and to work there, then I think you can fight it if you feel like God is still calling you, but never do it out of the motivation of revenge or I'll show them or anything like that. Because like Brian said earlier, what are the fruit of the Spirit, and how can we do this in that way and by those means?
Well, I have to say, I was in that position once, and it didn't feel good. I made a decision that even to this day, I still don't believe was a bad decision. But some people were offended by it, and that ended up festering over months and months, unbeknownst to me, despite all the evaluations and whatever that I sent out. And the senior pastor was on sabbatical, and when he came back, a family just kind of launched kind of like not a witch hunt or a trial, but I ended up going down and I was asked to resign, and I was so upset because I thought, well, this is just silly. And I didn't agree. But I ended up saying, okay, you know what? Do you really want this? Do you really want me to resign over this? Because it was a church who had a personnel committee. They weren't even on board. It was kind of a impetuous decision on the pastor's part. And then once the personnel committee got wind of it, they were like, this is silly. She shouldn't leave. So then you saw the pastor kind of out on the end. And he's such a great guy, a reasonable, lovely, great pastor who just made an emotional decision, not awesome in conflict management and skills. And I was like the 5th youth pastor in 6 years that something had happened with a few families. And so it didn't feel good. And then ultimately, despite the fact that I felt wronged and I wasn't there, I decided to resign anyway. But I don't know how I would have fought that. So Stephen, I mean, I did.
Yeah.
I felt wronged. It was a justice thing. I think I could have stayed on, but ultimately I think it was in the best interest for me and the church that I depart.
Yeah.
So how would you recommend going about, like you say, it's justice thing? How would you do that without putting the church at risk?
Well, I think that's a great question. It's a really good example. I think one of the things you have to do is you do have to ask the question, what is the best movement for the church? Because a lot of times in churches, there can be these kind of mini coups that happen. And it sounds like that's what happened with you. It doesn't sound like it was a majority of people. It was a very small but very vocal group. And unfortunately, that is what happens a lot of times.
It does.
You do have to ask what's best for the church, what's best for you in ministry. And sometimes, especially in your situation, I'm not saying you made the wrong decision at all, but in your situation where there had been 5 youth ministers in 6 years, and it seems like maybe they had departed in similar ways and because of similar circumstances, to me that sounds like an unresolved issue that the church never dealt with. And unless someone digs in, not in an angry way, but digs in and says, you know what, I don't think this is who we are, and I definitely don't think it's who we want to be, and forces the church to do the hard work of conflict management and dealing with those things and actually getting the stuff on the table, maybe even putting in systems and structures so that sort of uprising won't happen again, to set new standards for dialogue, and so these parking lot conversations aren't happening. Maybe that's part of the call is to kind of force the church into some of those discussions so they won't continue down unhealthy paths.
Yeah. It's a reminder to me. One of my favorite scripture passages is it comes from Paul in the New Testament. He says, "As far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone." And I don't think that means just bow down to conflict. I don't think it means to allow yourself to just get run over, but to do all that you can to create peace. And sometimes that's addressing conflict.
That's right.
Sometimes it is, being asked to leave a position and making sure you do that in a way that the result is peace in the life of those that you serve and that you work with in the church. And I don't say all that to make it sound simple.
That's right.
There's nothing simple about it. I think, in fact, whether it's that scripture or anything else, that if you're going to try and embrace it, it's going to get super crazy complex, and it's going to challenge you to do things that are unnatural, and to respond in ways like you did, Melissa, in ways that we've proposed here. I think maybe next week we dig into staffing one more time. We spent a lot of time today kind of talking about if you're asked to leave. Some people would call that being fired. But why don't we come back and say, okay, you've made the decision to leave. What does that look like? And kind of talk about it from that stance as well, and make sure we hit that piece.
Great idea. Love
Awesome.
it.
Well, it sounds like it's time for question number 2 in the Sustainable Ministry Challenge with Melissa and Stephen. The question for you today is another multiple choice. In what year was Ministry Architects actually incorporated?
Ooh.
Was that 1999, A, B, 2001, C, 2002, or D, 2005?
Oh. Incorporated.
What year was it incorporated?
All right, I went first last week, Stephen.
Yeah.
Boom.
Okay. I'm going to say 2005.
D, 2005. You're going to lock it in?
Locking it in. Boom. Done.
Melissa?
I'm locking in D as well.
2005 as well.
Yeah.
Oh,
You know why?
Why?
Well, here's the tricky part is
Tell me why.
incorporation. Because I thought we started doing Ministry Architects like 2003, 2004-ish.
Yeah.
But typically, incorporation comes a little later, unless Mark DeVries was just so ridiculously awesome he incorporated in 2002.
Well,
But I think it's 2005.
you just named it. He's so ridiculously awesome. Ministry Architects was actually incorporated in 2002. Yeah.
Wow. All right, from now on, here's what we've got to do, because I think Melissa's cheating. So here's what we got to do. We need to write it on a Post-it note.
Oh, and flash it.
And then hold it up with our answer.
Boom. Yeah.
No, I was seriously thinking that. Honest to God, I just shared with you my entire thought process.
I'm totally playing. I'm totally
Google
playing.
is too close.
Google.
I seriously would have said 2005.
So
I like that.
we're still
Sure.
tied at 5 points.
We're still tied. Okay.
We're still
5 and
tied.
5. And
Mark's not listening.
The tie will end next week.
All right, and I've got Ministry Architects Post-its, so you can
I
be
do
done.
too. Somewhere.
well, thanks so much, you guys. We will be back again next week to talk about leaving well by your own choice. In the meantime, where can folks keep up with you, Stephen? How can people find you? Reach out to you.
Would love for you to come visit me over at 12stonespirituality.com. On the new 12 Stone Spirituality podcast, you can just look that up on iTunes or on SoundCloud and subscribe. I'd love to have you over there subscribing. Or you can email me, Stephen@ministryarchitects.com.
Yay! You can email me at melissa@ministryarchitects.com, or I'm on Twitter at Melissa Rao. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, etc., etc., etc.
Everywhere.
Everywhere.
And I am Bryant Johnson. I'd love to receive an email from you. If you have a challenge question for Stephen and Melissa, please pose the question and then give us 4 multiple choice answers. Highlight the right one and the wrong one for me. Send that to Bryant, or wrong ones.
But in different colors.
Yeah.
Thank you. Clarity is important. But you can send that to Bryant@ministryarchitects.com. Find me on Facebook. Also do this thing called the Post Loop Podcast. You can follow us there. Our next episode's coming out, and actually it's probably out at this point. And we're talking with a lawyer on immigration and what that looks like from our faith standpoint. So feel free to check us out there as well. Thanks so much, you guys. It's good to see you. Good to chat.
Thanks. Bye guys.
Ha ha!